Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadhyasya Yato Anvayaditaratascha Artheshu Abhignaswarat Tene Brahmahridaya Adikavaye Muhyanti Yatsurayah Tejo Vari Mridam Yatha Vinimayo Yatra Trisargo Mrisha Dhamna Swena Sada Nirastakohakam Satyam Param Dhimahi Nigamakalpataror Galitam Phalam Shukamukadam Mritadrava Sanyutam Pibata Bhagavatam Rasamalayam Muhuraho Rasika Bhuvi Bhavukaha. We now enter the 69th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th Skandha. So, Shuka Brahma Rishi now continues. Now, in this chapter, we'll see the wonderful Leela of Krishna as a householder with all his wives. So, it is said that Narada, having heard that Krishna has married the unimaginable number of 16,108 wives, so as we saw, Krishna had 8 principal consorts whom he married through different circumstances: Rukmini, Jambavati, Satyabhama, and so on. And then, because of defeating the demon Narakasura, he had to accept 16,100 princesses as his wives. So, Narada was bewildered to even think, how can he have so many wives and how does he manage? So Narada thinks to himself how wonderful it is that the Lord, having descended as one person, have so many wives all at once. So with full of curiosity and eager to see this particular sport of the Lord, Narada came to Dwaraka and he enters Dwaraka city, and the Dwaraka city is beautifully described by Shuka Brahmam, because as we saw now, the city of Dwaraka was constructed by Vishwakarma, the divine architect, and so the whole city is so beautiful. It has got so many beautiful parks and gardens, and all the gardens are in full blossom. There is beautiful birds tweeting and bees humming, and there is all the swans that are crackling with sounds and cranes that are in ponds, and all the ponds and lakes are full of lotuses and lilies, and there are hundreds of thousands of mansions all built of crystal and silver with jewels like emeralds and gold and precious stones inlaid in them. And the city's roads are so beautifully paved. There are quadrangles and there are boulevards, there is marketplaces, there are temples, and there are courtyards. And so the whole place is so beautiful. There is canopies everywhere, there are flags flying, and there is shade to prevent the sunshine from being too harsh. And Narada observes all of these beautiful aspects of the city, and then he enters the quarters of the city where Krishna resides, and that quarters is the, one can say, the governmental area in today's terms. How the capital cities have a particular area where all the government buildings are all located. Similarly, there is a quarter of Dwaraka where all the palaces are all located, and there Vishwakarma has especially exhibited all his architectural skill, and therefore the whole place is so beautiful. And there he sees 16,000 and odd mansions. So essentially, there is one mansion each for each of the wives that Krishna has arranged. And so Narada sees this and he finds the main big palace among the 16,000 and odd palaces, and he enters that. And this is, of course, the palace where the main consort Rukmini is serving Krishna. And so here Narada sees that there are beautiful columns of coral, and there is gems on the pillars, and the floor is shining with made of precious stone, and there are canopies made of strings of pearls, and then the seats and beds are all made of excellent gems. It's looking so beautiful. There are very pretty looking maid servants wearing fine clothes, and male servants who are also elegantly dressed, and they are all busy, each of them having their own service. And the place is lit by not only lamps but by the luster of all the jewels which are so shiny and bright. And there is incense and various fragrant wood burning, and that is creating so much fragrant smoke going out that very beautifully and poetically it is described that the amount of smoke going out of the palace into the sky, looked like cloud was forming, and the peacocks, thinking that these are real clouds, were dancing. So this is the glory of this palace and generally all of Dwaraka. So Narada enters this palace and he sees Krishna there seated with Rukmini. And Rukmini, even though she has many maid servants to help her, who are all beautiful and very elegantly dressed, she herself personally is fanning the Lord. So as soon as the Lord sees Devarishi Narada enter, he instantly gets up from the bed of Rukmini, from the seat, and he bows low with his crown touching the feet of the sage and makes him sit on his own seat. So, this is how Krishna demonstrates the way to honor sages by his own example. So, he instantly gets up and he instantly bows down and makes Narada take Krishna's own seat. And not only that, it is said that though Krishna, whose feet, the water coming from his feet is what is sanctified as the holy river Ganga that purifies all, Krishna here got water to wash the feet of Devarishi Narada. So he not only made Narada sit down in his own seat, he massaged his feet, he washed his feet with water and took the water and sprinkled it on his head. So, this is how Krishna demonstrated the way to honor a sage. It says here that Krishna himself, who is the great sage Narayana, as we have seen, Krishna's one of the avatars is to descend as Nara Narayana, as two sages. And Narayana is Krishna himself, also in the form of a sage. So, though he himself is the great sage, here, because he is in the form of a king, he shows the right way of respecting a sage by honoring the sage with all ways of worship according to the prescribed dharma, and then speaks sweetly like nectar and says, O Lord, what service can we offer you? So, this is how a sage is to be addressed as one's own Lord, because the sage always abides in God realization. So, therefore, the sage is to be addressed this way. So, Krishna sets the example in every way. So, he says, the verse here says, Sampujya Devarishi Varyam Rishif Purano Narayano Narasako Vidinoditena Vanya Abhibhashya Mitaya Amritamishtaya Tampraha Prabho Bhagavate Karavama Hekim. So he says, Prabho Bhagavate Karavama Hekim. That means, O Lord, what can we do for you? So this is how, very humbly, though he is the supreme sage Narayana himself, he honored, because of being in the role of a king, he gave the highest respect to the great sage Narada in sweet nectar like words. So Narada was, of course, completely not only astonished but pleased and speechless. Then finally he collects himself and says, O Almighty Lord of the universe, your love for your devotees is beyond compare, and you also equally chastise all the wicked, and you have come down to earth of your own accord for the supreme welfare of this world. And now today I have been fortunate to behold your lotus feet. You are doing this show of honoring my feet, which shows your greatness, but I am honored to see your lotus feet that all the great sages, Brahma himself, everyone is contemplating upon, and your feet are like the boat that one uses to cross the ocean of suffering. Or here he says they are like the rope that one can use to come out of the well of suffering. And therefore, please bless me so that I never forget you and always contemplate on your lotus feet. So, in this way, Narada offers his respects, astonished at the way Krishna is perfectly living as a householder, following the dharma correctly. Now, Narada is curious, okay, I've seen Krishna in one palace with Rukmini. How about all the other palaces? They must all be just the queens there who are looking for Krishna to come, because Krishna is here with Rukmini. So, in order to ascertain this and also see how the power of Yogamaya works, Krishna enters the next mansion, and to his, or Narada enters the next mansion. And when Narada enters the next mansion, to his great surprise, there Krishna is sitting there playing dice with his consort there in that mansion along with his friend Uddhava. And as soon as Narada enters, he gets up instantly and with great devotion says, "Oh Narada, when did you come?" So he doesn't even acknowledge that he is aware of his arrival, that he had already seen him in Rukmini's palace, because this is the expansion of Krishna. Krishna has expanded himself in 16,000 forms, which is bewildering to everyone, to Narada and to all the queens as well, because each queen, as already mentioned, thinks she has Krishna all to herself. So Narada is getting this unique display where Narada goes and Krishna very innocently says, "Oh sage, when did you come? You are ever established in the self. What service can we do for you?" So Narada was, of course, astonished, and then he silently rose up and went to the next mansion. So Narada now says to himself, "Okay, let me just find out what are all the various leelas the Lord is doing in this way." So he goes to the next mansion. So now here he sees Krishna playing with his infant sons. Then he goes to the next mansion. There he sees Krishna having a bath. Then in this way he goes to every mansion, and we will see how every single prescribed duty of a householder king is done perfectly by Krishna in each of these mansions. So in one mansion, Krishna is offering oblations into the sacrificial fire. In another mansion, he is performing the fivefold daily sacrifices. So there are 5 prescribed sacrifices for householders, including reading the scriptures, offering fire sacrifice, honoring guests, honoring the forefathers, and also honoring all the devatas, that is, all the aspects of nature. So all these fivefold sacrifices are observed by the Lord perfectly in another house, another mansion. Then another mansion he is seen feeding the sages, and in another mansion he is seen eating the prasad, the leftover food, after the sages have been fed. In another mansion he is performing the Sandhya prayers. In another mansion he is doing Gayatri Japa, that is the chanting of the Gayatri mantra, which is the most sacred of all mantras. Then he goes to another mansion. There he is in a completely different mood, practicing fencing with a sword and a shield. And then he goes to another mansion. There he is riding on horses and elephants and chariots. Then he goes to another mansion where he is resting on his bed and being eulogized by poets and so on. Then he goes to one more mansion where he is conferring with his counselors, that is, he is discussing with Uddhava and various counselors on various aspects of government. But then he goes to a different mansion. There he sees him sporting in waters with his queen. Then he goes to one more mansion. There he sees Krishna giving well decorated cows to Brahmanas, to the sages. And then in another mansion, he is listening to the recitation of the scriptures. So here we see 2 things. One is how Krishna is able to display this wonderful Yogamaya, where he is performing all these activities all at once to the great astonishment of Narada. But the other thing also shown through this is all the various duties of a householder are shown by Krishna, not just a householder, but also a king. So some of these duties are prescribed as a householder, some specifically for a king, such as practicing fencing, riding chariots, and all the rest. And so all of these are engaged by Krishna at the same time. So Narada continues, because there are 16,000 mansions and Narada has all the time, so he wants to just see this wonderful Leela of Krishna doing all these wonderful pastimes. So then he goes again to the next mansion. There he sees Krishna making merry and indulging in loving talk with his consort. And then he goes to the next mansion. There he is seen in a very serious mood, observing some ritual. Then he goes to another mansion where Krishna is discussing about how to collect wealth in the right way. And then in another mansion, Krishna is enjoying pleasures which are according to dharma. Then he goes to another mansion. There he sees Krishna sitting in meditation. The one who is the object of all meditation, he is sitting in meditation. Then he goes to another mansion. There he sees Krishna offering elders various articles of worship. Then he goes to the next mansion. There he sees Krishna preparing for war. There are some enemies against whom war needs to be waged, and Krishna is discussing war strategy. But then another mansion, he's discussing peace settlement because there is a different army that needs to be, or a different ruler who needs to be peace settled with. So he's discussing that. Then in another mansion, he's seen sitting with Balaram and discussing how to ensure well being of the people of the country. And then in another mansion, he's seen as organizing the wedding of his sons, and another mansion, weddings of his daughters, because there is 16,000 wives, and as we already saw, he had 10 sons and one daughter each with all the wives. So there is no dearth of children. So each and all of them are of different ages. Some are very young as infants, as we saw. Some are old enough to get married, and so on. So in some mansions, he's organizing weddings. In some mansions, he's sending off the married bride to her husband's house. In another mansion, he's receiving the girl who's got pregnant and comes back home, because as the tradition is, when the daughter gets pregnant, she comes to the parents' house to deliver, because she'll be well taken care, fed well, and she can also be very peaceful without any stress. And then she delivers the child, and then she goes back to her husband's place. This is a tradition that's been there for many, many, many centuries, and that's what Krishna observes here by welcoming his own daughter to come home to deliver. Then in another mansion, he's seen as offering worship. In another mansion, he is performing some grand sacrifice. And then in another mansion, he is engaged in constructing some wells and gardens and temples and so on. And in another mansion, he is seen as preparing to ride a horse to go hunting. And in another mansion, he is seen as preparing to go incognito among people to ascertain the views of the people about the government. So this is a practice that was done very prevalent among many kings, where they would themselves, in order to not simply rely on spies and so on, but to directly ascertain the views of the people, the citizenry, they would actually go incognito inside the crowded streets and just talk to regular people, and thereby know the direct feedback of how the people are feeling about the government. And that way they were directly in touch with the pulse of the people. So this is a very good practice that was maintained by many kings, and Krishna himself set the example by doing that. So thus we see, not only that does Krishna do all the various things at the same time, but we also get a lesson on all the various things that ought to be done by a king, by a householder, and so on. So seeing all this, Narada is of course tremendously astonished, and then he smiles. Finally he approaches Krishna in the last palace that he sees Krishna before he wants to leave. He sees Krishna, who is displaying all these powers, and he speaks to him. It says, Ato uvacha hrishikesham narada prahasanniva yogamaya udayam vikshya manushi miyusho gatim. So hrishikesha means the one who has all the senses regulated, which is a beautiful name for Krishna. So Narada had a smile, big smile on his face, because by this point he is not able to, he is beyond rather even being astonished to see all of this. And the best part is, as we saw, every palace that he goes to, not only does Krishna do all this, but every palace he gets up, he welcomes Narada, and he says, "Oh sage, how are you? When did you come? What can I do for you?" And so beyond a point, Narada cannot do anything but smile at this Leela of Krishna, where this beauty and this nectar-like words coming from Krishna so innocently, as if he's seeing him for the first time in each of the 16,000 and odd palaces. So Narada finally smiles and says, "Oh Lord, your powers of yoga are beyond what anyone can comprehend, and yet you have revealed it to me as a sample out of your own costless grace. Now I'm fully satisfied, and so I'm going to leave now. And all I ask for is to give me the blessing that I'll sing the glory of your pastimes that purifies the whole world." He says, Paryatami tava udgayan leelam bhuvana pavanim. He says, I'm going to just go around singing your pastimes, and that's what Narada always does, goes around singing Narayana, Narayana, and glorifying the Supreme Lord's wonderful pastimes such as these. He'll relate all of these to whoever is interested and thereby create more and more devotion in the hearts of people. So Krishna addresses him finally, now getting out of the way of this innocent way of welcoming Narada as if Krishna is simply a king who is honoring a sage. Now Krishna reveals his true form and he tells Narada, "Oh Narada, you have to understand that I am not only a teacher of dharma, but I have to practice it myself because people follow the example of what the king does and especially what I do. Therefore, don't get perplexed, my son. This is how it ought to be." So now Krishna takes the position of the Lord. So far, he was taking the position of a king and addressing Narada as sage, as Lord, and giving him the greatest respect. Now, finally, because Narada wants to leave, Krishna reveals his original form and he says, "Oh son, don't get bewildered. This is because I not only have to teach dharma, but I have to live by it for everyone to practice it." He says, "Brahman dharmasya vaktaham karta tad anumodita." So I'm not only the speaker of dharma, but also the follower of dharma, and that is how people live. So this is exactly as Krishna says in the Gita, 3rd chapter. There is a verse, 21st verse, where Krishna says, people follow what great beings do. So this is how people live, and therefore it is especially important for great beings, leaders, to set the right example. That is why a society is always reflecting the leaders, and therefore if leaders have great character and compassion and so on, the society also lives in that way. So Krishna instructs this to Arjuna in the Gita, where he says, "Yadyad acharati shreshtaha taddadeva itaro janaha sayat pramanam kurute lokastad anuvartate." He says, whatever the great beings do, that is what the common citizenry also follow. They set the authority which the rest of the people follow. And therefore he was instructing Arjuna that you are a leader, you are a great prince, so you have to get rid of all this doubt and all this confusion and fight. And that's why Krishna instructed him with the clarity so that he could fight and discharge his duty. Now if that is the case for Arjuna, Krishna himself has to set the perfect example, which he does. Therefore Krishna himself says here that I am setting the perfect example so that the words I speak are also seen in my actions and people can follow it. So seeing this, Narada was completely not only pleased but feeling so blessed, and he saw the same Krishna performing all these duties in various ways, and seeing again and again this display of the yogic power of Krishna of infinite prowess, Narada could not help but feel overwhelmed. It says here, Krishnasya anantaviryasya Yogamaya mahodayam muhur drishtva rishim abhut vismito jata kautukaha. It says, seeing this Yogamaya, Krishnasya anantaviryasya, the infinite Lord Krishna's Yogamaya, beholding this, Narada was completely overwhelmed, and therefore he left greatly delighted and thinking only of him and thinking only of his glories. And meanwhile, Krishna, who is Narayana himself, with the help of Yogamaya, continues to live on as a human being in each of the 16,000 palaces, and each of his wives are all feeling the special association of Krishna as their husband. In this way, Shuka Brahma Rishi concludes this chapter by saying, these are the great exploits performed by Krishna, who is the Supreme Lord, who has come down as a human, as a king, and engaging in such wonderful pastimes that nobody can comprehend, and yet simply listening to them is so wonderful in awakening devotion in the heart. And therefore, that's the beauty of listening to this, that Shuka Brahma Rishi says. The fruit of listening to all of these pastimes of Krishna is it awakens devotion in the heart as it does. With this chapter ends. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.